As I said, I'm going to talk briefly about the history of trade aid because it's quite interesting, and interesting the way that it actually developed, completely unplanned. The growth and development that happened up to the stage I came in, which was actually 2002, not 2012, big correction. The challenges I faced when I arrived, because I did come from a business, running my own business, and it hit me in the head quite hard, going into a social enterprise. The development I've done with trade aid while I've been CEO, and then a little bit around how we ensure we hold true to our values, because we think that's one of the biggest challenges we've got going through as we expand the business side of our business, and then some of the other challenges that we got, and then hopefully we should have time for some questions at the end. So let me begin that trade aid began with two Christchurch people, Richard and Vi Cottrell. Richard was a lawyer here, practicing in town, and Vi was a teacher. They had three young children, but they decided they need some adventure in their life, and they went over to Delhi in India to work, Richard on the legal side, to work with Tibetan refugees who were resettling with the Dalai Lama leaving Tibet at the time when China invaded. They stayed there for 2 years, and during that time, Vi didn't want to sit there fiddling her thumb, so she got involved with the Tibetan community, looking at the skills and how they could raise income, and they made carpets. They made pretty good carpets. So when they came back to New Zealand, they decided the least they could do was bring a shipment of carpets with them. So they did that, and it duly arrived about 3 months after they got home, sat in their garage for about 8 months, and then they thought we better do something about it. So they hired out what was then what is now the Coca Gallery, put up a display, and sold every rug in 20 minutes. This is the time, younger ones won't understand it, that import restrictions and licensing was on, and people just hadn't seen this type of product on the marketplace. So they thought, hey, we've got something here. So they did gather a group of friends together and say, we think we could bring in more of this type of product and from around the world to help people in developing countries and to talk about trade and justice. And so that did happen. And they got a board, and I love this quote about trade aid because the tension and the dynamic that David mentioned was there in the early days, and one of them described it as, on one side of the table, committed, respected, skilled city business people. On the other, wide-eyed, idealistic, well-travelled revolutionaries pumped full of liberation theory. He was a Catholic priest, so he got a wee bit carried away. But that was a tension and dynamic that we've actually managed to hold on our board for 43 years. And it's good to hold that, and we deliberately try to keep that. I don't think it was deliberate at the beginning, but I certainly made it deliberate as we went along. So the idea was never to be a business. The idea was actually to have some samples, to really bring samples in, and then show businesses like Haywrights and Ballantynes and Mackenzie and Willis, and whose all executives did sit on the board, that these products, and then put them in touch so they could buy it. But what happened at the same time, it was the early 70s, 72, 73, there was a massive religious understanding of social justice that was going on, and especially in the Catholic Church. And a person here, Father John Kernow, who was training the young priests at the time, was a fervent believer in this, and especially what was happening in South America. So one of the priests who trained under him actually went to Bangladesh to work with the Catholic Relief Agency over there, and they were making jute products, bags and macrame pot plant holders and this type of thing. And he just simply packed a whole shipment of this up and sent it to Richard and Vi and said, please sell this and send us the money when you have. And when these other priests heard about it, they said, oh, we'll get involved in this. And so they took a shop in the Catholic cathedral for $2 a week, and Trade Aid, I guess, was born. We are a secular organisation, I would put out, but that was our founding. And so we were forced, they then said we want other product. So Trade Aid was forced to go and look and actually import the product instead of just the samples. And this must have touched a nerve, because there was an explosion of shops opening around the country, completely independently, completely unplanned, and they simply, some of them were Corso shops, others were just people who'd heard about this Trade Aid shop in Christchurch and wanted their own in their own town, and they just opened up and then said, please supply us, we've opened a shop. Most of them were called third world shops. Some had small planet shops, and there were some crazy names out there. After a while, a number of national meetings were held, and it was determined that they would trade under the trade aid banner. And most converted to that. Some took a little bit longer. And during the 80s that occurred, and during the 90s, some common colours and signage were all brought into play, with lots of angst and hand-wringing, I might add, because you've got to realise that these people were there, it was all voluntary, they were there for social justice issues. And in fact, one of the original board members left the organisation when the organisation turned over $100,000. He said we'd sold out. The business had sold out to the commercial world and he couldn't belong to it anymore. Sales were going well, but these people, bless their hearts, had no idea of running a retail shop, no idea of commerce or how it worked, and some of them even weren't putting markups on the products because they thought somehow that was taking money away from the people we bought it off. And so a massive amount of debt was run up by the shops to Trade Aid in Christchurch. And so at one point the auditors said this isn't a going concern, we can't sign the accounts off. And so they realised, it's about 98, they realised something had to happen. So they did a massive change and said we've got to commercialise this business. So they brought in a trading board, established a trading board that was set in place, and then looked to employ a general manager that would run the organisation for them on a commercial basis. They put an interim general manager in first to make some tough decisions and put some blood on the floor, and there was blood on the floor amongst the organisation. And then he did that for a couple of years, and then I came in 2002 to take over. So, that was me in the younger years. So my background, I actually trained as a teacher until I realised children were involved. And so I thought, after a very long section, I formed 2 children. I thought, this is not for me. So I got out and I actually went into the wholesale business, into sports actually, and into sales and a regional manager with the largest sports company in New Zealand. And then in '87, I founded Seventh Wave Wetsuits with a good friend of mine, Paul Zarifa. Through that, I got involved in New Zealand Made, and what did it mean to be made in New Zealand? There were a lot of discussions around that time. I remember we had Icebreaker was part of a team when Jeremy was just starting out, and he was saying, well, I need to get my product made overseas, but the wool's made here, isn't that New Zealand Made? And so there were all these discussions that were happening, and it got me really interested in making products overseas and looking at the conditions of those factories. And I did, during that time, take a trip to Taiwan and visit a factory, and it was a very small town, and arrived at night and I had to stay with the owner of the factory because there were no hotels in this town. I woke up in the morning and this was a 3-storey mansion that I was in. I looked out, there was a swimming pool, it was like a luxury hotel. But then I looked, we were surrounded by a 10-foot high fence with razor wire on the top. There were guard dogs wandering around inside the thing, and then outside it, as far as I could see, was a slum. And I stood there on the balcony of my room looking out, and I suddenly thought, I had kind of an epiphany. I thought, I'm on the wrong side of this fence. I'd rather be on the other side. And I don't know whether that led me to, I sold my business out to my partner, but I felt I wanted to change. I just didn't want to be sitting there trading dollars in business. And I did that in 2001, and then couldn't find anything I really wanted to do until my wife found an advert for the general manager of Trade Aid. And she said, found you the perfect job and you can get out of the house. So I think that was her main reason. So I did. So I joined and went for the interview, and they said, good, can you start? When can you start? And I said, oh, I'll have to work into this. And they said, please start in 2 days. So I did. And I got a bit of a shock when I arrived because it was an interesting interview. They went into the social side, what my thoughts were, what my understanding were, but there was no discussion around the business. I got a year-old financial papers, and that was about all. But I walked in with 2 months to go in the financial year to find we were looking at a $250,000 loss. We had too much stock. We had about $400,000 worth of bad debt sitting in there. And in fact, we'd had static sales for 9 years. The sales hadn't moved $100,000 in 9 years. Ooh. Day 2, that's a bit of a shock to you. So, but I was confident I could turn it around. I thought these are numbers you can work with. We have to buy less stock. We're paying too much for it. I got to get rid of some of these bad debtors and do all that. And if I applied a business discipline to it, we'd get there. But that's when I found out what working for a social enterprise was all about, and the particular challenges that you face when you go into one. Because the first thing I ran up against was a structure. And this is actually a very simplified model of Trade Aid's structure. There's some few more bits I could add in, but basically it was what David was talking about. Not only did I have a commercial board, I had an incorporated society committee that was overlooking the social side and the development side, and that I was adhering to the charter. And unbeknown to me, I didn't own Trade Aid shops. They were still independent business units, and I had a franchise agreement up with them only, and they were fiercely independent, thought that the head office was making all the mistakes in the world, and didn't necessarily want to listen to us. It was difficult, to say the least. I also found out that there were others involved in the organisation that had a bigger say in it, as I had as the general manager at the time. I had 800 volunteers, all working freely, all with an opinion, all who thought it should be heard. I had really passionate and committed staff, again, all with an opinion, and all thought they should be making the decisions, or at least it should be a cooperative model and they should get to vote on the decisions as well. And I had a number of people who only wanted to see development outcomes. They weren't interested in the financial side of it, and I just had to look after that. And they didn't want to see profits there, because profits meant we weren't delivering on a development model. So it was pretty difficult. We also had visions and mission statements and objectives literally for Africa. But really, with no clear idea how we would achieve those objectives or how we would get those missions. But my biggest challenge was to get my head around the idea of running a dynamic social enterprise. You know, it's difficult to come in when your main KPI is cost of goods sold, and to increase it, to pay as much as possible for the stock you're purchasing, to have a commitment to a supplier that you would buy a certain value off them every year, irrespective of whether you could sell it or not. And being production, so what that meant was we were production-led, not market-led. And putting the well-being of those suppliers in front of our own well-being. And I would say it took me at least 2 years to fully get my head around that and be able to accept it fully, but not just accept it. I think I could accept the idea at the beginning, but be able to accept that I had to build a business model around that, rather than my first interpretation was, I've got to change this way of thinking because we're not going to go anywhere. I also came against the fact that I had checks on my power. I had these other people that were looking at me. I had a subcommittee of the board who actually determined who I could buy from and who I couldn't buy from. And if I wanted to end a relationship, they determined it, not me, from a development perspective. Those people, I sat on that board and 2 other staff members did, but the majority had to be from outside of Trade Aid, and they had to be development experts, so that we're making our decisions based on development principles. It was hard to handle. And then I had to find that, in fact, everything I did had to be linked back to our charter and to the objectives of the organisation, including job descriptions, so that people kind of knew what they were doing. But they were so airy-fairy, I don't think anyone quite knew what they were doing. What I did have to help me through that was I had a fantastic commercial board that had been put in place. They simply said, you've come from your own business, treat this as your own business. And secondly, they said, don't let us get comfortable. We're not here to be comfortable. Take some risks. Push the envelope out all the time. So I did. The first thing I realised was that I had to have a simple strategy that everyone in the organisation could understand. I had to bring some goals in that were pragmatic and practical, not save the world and end poverty by 25 at the time it was. So, and give everyone a role that they could do to achieve those simple pragmatic goals. I had to seek input from people, but make it clear I was going to make the decision. and I had to get some runs on the board. If I couldn't prove I could deliver, I wasn't going to have any standing. No one was going to listen to me. I was just another talking head from Christchurch that had been put in place. And I really had to get across that an understanding of profits, that they were next year's growth. Up to that point, a lot of people in the organisation thought profits were undelivered benefits to our suppliers. And I had to say, no, they're next year's growth. We have to produce them and we have to build on them. So I did. So the first thing I worked with, and it's the only thing we had at that time, was shops primarily selling handcrafts. So I had to kind of improve our branding. I put paid managers into all our shops, even if it was 20 hours a week or 10 hours a week in some of the smaller stores. I had to improve the merchandising, move some to locations, improve the customer service. And it was interesting. This was easy. Actually, this was relatively easy. I would think it would be hard, but I think everyone realised that we weren't working well and it wasn't happening. I also wrote off all the debt that had been there in the business and been hanging around for quite a while, and said we've got to address this on a yearly basis. We cannot let this debt build up over time. And we rapidly started to achieve about 15% minimum year-on-year growth through our stores. I was quite surprised, actually. Everyone thought I was great. I was really just surprised that we could do that. But what I found was this wasn't enough. I had some ideas that I wanted to achieve, and this really wasn't enough to do it. So I thought, okay, we started to generate some cash reserves, and I said to the board, we need to push out a little bit further. So in fact, we got into coffee. And this was the first time, I think, in the organisation I had a sleepless night, and I probably had 2 or 3, to be honest, because I bought 8 tonnes of coffee, which is half a container, but at the time it was 2 years' supply, and I was committing a fair bit of money into this that it didn't happen. But it was the best decision I made. Today we bring in 1,200 tonnes of coffee, somewhere around 60 containers. In fact, we're the second largest coffee importer into New Zealand for specialty coffee. So that's any coffee outside of instant. We now are responsible for about 19% of the total New Zealand market in coffee. In Christchurch, the brands like Hummingbird, Underground, Switch, Addington Coffee Company, it's all our coffee. Nationally, Cafe La Fare, Atomic, People's Coffee, and about 70 other smaller roasters. So we were spectacularly successful in bringing fair trade organic coffee into the marketplace, and a lot of it is not sold as fair trade. A lot of the companies are actually buying it for the organic principles of it. So this became quite a good cash cow for us, and that's why I brought it in. We had to have revenue other than our stores. You don't make money in retail selling handcraft products. Low value, low volume. I needed another income supply. Once we set that up, we were feeling pretty good about it. We decided we'd push ourselves again, and we went into packaged food. The main reason for doing this is, I said, again, we want a product we can sell outside of our own stores. We want to support our own stores, but we want to get outside it. So we went into this. We've now got about 85 SKUs. We're doing about 4 million in this with these products. Most 2/3 of them outside our shops, either supermarkets, mainly New World. We chose that on a values proposition, most aligned to us because they're owner operated. We could speak directly to the owners and being a cooperative. And organic stores who saw benefit in having kind of dual certification. Most of our products are organic certified, and then they're guaranteed fair trade as well. And this business grew as well, strongly at the beginning, but now it's racking up about 15% year-on-year sales, and it will become the biggest part of our business. It's not that. So we got happy with that. Where we were sitting, we'd got our money back, our development money back out of it. It was beginning to get profitable for us. So again, we decided to push the envelope. And this is our latest venture we went into, just in a minute, and about 18 months ago. Okay. Okay. So that's, I said going into coffee was the best decision I ever made, but now I'm thinking going into chocolate was the best decision I ever made. And the reason why is if you can have some samples down the back of the room there to try it. So this is roughly what our business looks like today. So Trade Aid Shops on the left is now about our third, even falling to a quarter of our business. So that was all we had in 2002, and we've developed the rest of it. It took us 40 years to turn over a cumulative $100 million. It'll take us 5 to do the next 100 million, and then we believe it'll take us 3 to do the next 100 million. So we're growing rapidly. The next steps, we've just started. Next week we're sending our first order to Australia of our chocolate. It's about a $100,000 order is going. I think we're making 500,000 bars of chocolate a year at the moment. It's extremely cash flow positive to us, and we think we can expand hugely on that into Australia and then follow it up with our other food products behind once we've established that distribution channel. So we've got a few things going. What are the challenges? They're quite big. I think the first one, and the board has certainly acknowledged this, is holding on to our values. As the dollar values get up, you can get swayed and start to think, I could make real money over here. So it is holding on to those as they grow. We're doing that in several ways, that we're joining organisations that audit us and hold us to account. So the Council for International Development, which is New Zealand, all NGOs in New Zealand working in international aid belong to, they run an audit over us to look for development principles. The World Fair Trade Organisation audit us with independent auditors on our fair trade practices. We put out social accounts, audited social accounts, and in fact we're the leading organisation in New Zealand to do so. And that's a bit sad because we only do them about every 3 years. But we're gonna lift our game on that one. And we want to strengthen our structure. When I first came in, I said there were these checks and balances and I had to work through other people. I really didn't like that. I wanted to make decisions and I wanted to make them quickly. I now am a strong believer in it. I think it's slowed down my decision-making process, and I think because of that, I made better decisions. And when I started to have to explain to people and get them on side, I realised they were the wrong decisions as well. So I really want to put in some more steps and checks and balances on that. And we want to move away strongly from being a CEO-led organisation. We want the organisation to have its own culture, and that leaders will come in and go out of it and they will add to it, but they won't determine its direction or its culture or the way it behaves. We believe we'll be stronger if we can get to that point. Spending profits. This is a really concern for social enterprises, especially not-for-profits. It's kind of not a good look to have a big bottom line. People start to look sideways at you and say, what are you guys up to? And so you do have to keep spending. It's probably what's driven our expansion. And it's terrible that we have to feel like that. We should be able to build up reserves and strong reserves. We're a trading organisation, but we get criticism from outside our organisation and strongly inside our organisation from all our volunteers if that bottom line gets too big, and that is driving a lot of behaviour with us. As we're growing, getting staff with the right values that match the values, and I mean every organisation struggles with this, but it's not only finding people with the right values, but it's staff within our organisations accepting people whose values are maybe not quite as strong as their ones. I think that's a big area that we struggle with. I mean, I have to send people home at night and warn them to go home because this is their life for them. And when someone comes in who maybe is not quite as passionate as that, they don't think they should be there, and I've had a wee bit of trouble with that. We're getting over it now, but it is a struggle to deal with very passionate people within your organisation. Board cynicism, I'm losing it. When I first came in, I had especially two very, very strong financial people on the board, and I'll mention one of them, Chris Knowles. He was Chief Financial Officer of Foodstuffs. He's dealing in billions of dollars, and he'd come along to our board meeting. At the time, we're dealing in a couple of million, and I think it was a feel-good thing for him and a bit of a joke. And he was always cynical of what we could achieve and what we could do. Unfortunately, and as he said, I used to be to the right of Genghis Khan, and he said, now I'm a believer, and I thought, time to replace you, buddy. I've got enough believers. I need cynics to sit there and hold me to account and kind of challenge whether we should be doing something or not. But I will say, in coming into this organisation, it was the first time I'd worked with a board, and I found that so beneficial. And I wish every small and medium business would put a board in place, because I think my previous business would have done a lot better if I had to be accountable to a board. The last big challenge, I think, is managing expectations. We've been successful, and everyone expects us to be more successful now. And deliver. We put a lot into delivering benefits back to our suppliers, and the expectations being able to deliver that have gone up. And I'm not sure that the expectations within our business now are deliverable by me or by the business in the medium term. And I think that comes about because social enterprises sometimes become public property. People truly think they own us. And we have just members of the public who get very upset if they think we've taken a wrong step or gone the wrong way. When I first started to do Shops Up, I had so many letters and emails come to me saying, why am I spending my money on shop fittings? Why aren't I giving it back to the people that matter? And that used to concern me. I think my skin's got thicker over time. But a lot of social enterprise, you have a lot of buy-in, you have a lot of passion, and people think they own you and have got a right, and they get really upset, and trying to control those expectations is something I think is going to be extremely challenging for us over this next period of time. There is, as always, a constant tension, I think David alluded to, between the business and the development aspects. I find that really rewarding. I think I've been there it's coming up for 15 years now, and I sometimes wonder why I'm still there with some of the challenges that come at me. But I get a buzz out of that tension, actually. And to be working in an organisation where the do-good doesn't happen if you make a profit, it's only if I make a profit things can be good. I think that's what's wrong with society today. We hear it all the time. We can't do that unless the economy's pumping well. Well, I would say the economy's got to deliver good, no matter whether it's making a profit or not making a profit. And that's certainly in all the social enterprises we're seeing around, and it's embedded in our organisation. You've got to be, if you're making a loss, you're still doing good along the way. You can't escape that, and you hold true to it. So I find that fantastic as a leader. And I believe there's massive opportunities for leadership, through the program you're going through in that social sector, social enterprise sector. There's an explosion of social enterprises opening up at the moment. The problem with them all is they have fantastic ideas and fantastic things they want to achieve, but what I see is they struggle to monetize that. They are relying either on such low costs that there's no way that they could grow the business, or on funding models that rely on continuous donations, which we don't think as a training organisation is sustainable. So I believe there's massive scope within that sector for leaders to step in and show these people the way, and some of them are really desperate for it. And so I think there's huge opportunities out there for leadership programs to look at that, and the government is pouring lots of money into this sector through the Akina Foundation especially, to try and develop it, because I'm quite staggered the national government does this, but they feel there's a real public good in encouraging social enterprises. And excuse me for my cynicism there, my political cynicism, but I kind of see that area like trade aid was in the 1970s, where we started out, where we were all mission and very little business, and that's where social enterprise is just at the moment, and it needs some business input along the way, and we're thinking that we should play a role in that and step up. We're not quite sure how yet, but it's something some of the leaders at Trade Aid are looking to do, and pretty keen on doing it, because we want to capture some of that dynamic thinking to push us along as well. And I would say there's one area I see that's really crying out for this sort of endeavour and leadership, and that's in the Pacific. We do work closely with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. I'm trying to prepare a project for them at the moment. They've come to us and said, would we develop something for them? But they throw $20–30 million a year into the Pacific with a success rate, I would say, of 0. And any way I read it, it's 0. Nothing is working in that area, and they're really struggling to do it, because what they're doing is they've required every NGO to work in the economic sphere. So it's all based on putting in some economic improvements and economic development, and they don't know what they're doing in this area. They really don't, and they're starting off developing these projects and have never thought about the market. I just pull my hair out and at it. So I believe there's massive opportunities for young leaders to get in there and take part in that environment. It is crying out for it. So I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Geoff. Some questions, folks. Any questions for Geoff?